Hello, let's go look. New motivate story.
Echoes of the past. The Aegean Sea glittered under the harsh brilliance of the midday sun, waves lapping against the shores of ancient Athens. Somewhere among the labyrinthine alleyways near the agora, a young philosopher-in-training, Callisthenes, sat under a cypress tree, his scrolls spread around him like the wings of an oracle bird. His mentor, the wise and weathered Diocles, watched him from the shadows, arms crossed over his faded chiton. "You memorize Plato," Diocles said with the trace of a smile. "But do you understand him?" Callisthenes blinked. "I think so, master." He believed the soul has three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite, and that reason should guide them all. Diocles nodded. "But why does reason guide? What fuels it? What wakes a man before dawn, drives him to toil even when no one is watching?" Callisthenes looked down at his ink-stained hands. "Purpose." "Ah," Diocles said, stepping into the light. "Now you begin to live." From that day on, Callisthenes stopped merely reciting philosophy and began seeking something deeper. In his city-state torn by war and ambition, he started writing treatises not on what man is, but what man ought to be. His voice became one of principle in a time of pragmatism. He died young, lost in a skirmish while defending the sacred library at Pergamon from invaders. But before his last breath, he whispered, "My purpose was never mine alone." May the echo continue. Centuries turned like the pages of an ancient scroll. Fast forward 2,000 years. The city was no longer Athens, but New York, with its own agora of steel and glass. Its philosophers were no longer dressed in flowing robes, but sleek suits and worn hoodies. One such modern thinker was Dr. Elena Mora, a cognitive neuroscientist at Columbia University, known for her work on neural motivation systems. But Elena wasn't always a scientist. She had once dreamed of writing novels, of traveling to forgotten corners of the world and chronicling human stories. Her father, a Dominican immigrant who scrubbed subway cars at midnight, had called her Mi Pluma, his pen, believing she would write truth into the world. Yet after his death, practicality swept in. Neuroscience offered stability, grants, respect. Elena's days became a routine ballet of EEG readings, data logs, lectures. Yet she felt like a ghost in a system designed for machines. It wasn't until she met Theo Lin, a patient in a clinical trial on motivation loss, that something shifted. Theo had once been a child prodigy, painting murals at 10, speaking at TEDx by 15. But by 28, after years of pressure and online fame, he had withdrawn completely. No art, no speaking, just stillness. Elena asked him, "What happened to your drive?" Theo smiled hollow. "I forgot why I started. Everyone had expectations. I became what they wanted, not who I was." Elena paused. "If you remembered your why, would the how feel different?" He looked at her like someone waking up from a long sleep. That night, Elena returned to her apartment, bypassed her usual wine and reruns routine, and opened a dusty journal. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Your words can heal where medicine fails." She began to write. Elena's research shifted focus. She dove into the neuroscience of intrinsic purpose, how identity and values directly impact neural reward circuits. She found ancient wisdom in modern data. The ventral tegmental area, the prefrontal cortex, the striatum, all danced in harmony when a person pursued meaning, not just goals. Her lab became a haven for artists, burned-out doctors, overachieving teens, all people who had lost their why. They weren't patients. They were pilgrims. Theo began painting again, murals of neurons and mythic beasts, blending science and soul. His work covered the walls of the psychology wing at Columbia. Elena began lecturing not just about the how of brain science, but the why behind it all. Her talks ended with a story, that of a young philosopher in Athens who asked why reason guides, and of his final whisper, "May the echo continue." Elena didn't know how that story came to her. Maybe it was something she read long ago. Maybe it came from something deeper. All she knew was this: purpose is not found. It's remembered. Elena's research garnered global attention. Articles buzzed with headlines like "The Purpose Circuit" and "Neuroscientist Turns to Ancient Philosophy to Treat Burnout." Yet as acclaim grew, so did pressure, from her institution, from funding boards, from herself. One gray November morning, she sat in her office, staring at an email from the university's ethics committee. They questioned her use of patient art in research presentations. Too subjective, they said. Too unorthodox. They want control, Theo muttered, leaning against the doorframe. They don't understand that healing isn't linear. It's art. It's soul work. Elena nodded. They want numbers, not nuance. Theo smiled. Then give them both. You taught me that purpose is where science and story meet. It was that conversation that sparked her idea, the Full Circle Project. She launched a radical new study, part clinical trial, part creative workshop. Participants weren't asked about symptoms. They were asked about values, about childhood dreams, about the people they once were before the world carved them into sharper shapes. Each week combined neuroimaging with something called purpose reconstruction, where participants built visual maps of their lives, not timelines, but constellations. Stars of trauma and triumph, nebulas of doubt, galaxies of hope. And something miraculous happened. Neural patterns shifted. Motivation surged. People didn't just get better. They remembered themselves. But progress invited scrutiny. A conservative think tank labeled her work emotional pseudoscience. Her lab's funding was put on hold pending a review. She was tired in the marrow of her bones. One night, long after the students had gone, she sat in her empty lab and whispered into the dark. Why did I even start this? And then she saw it, Theo's mural on the far wall. A depiction of the hippocampus as a labyrinth, and in the center, a small child holding a torch. Elena stood. That child was her. Always had been. Across the ocean, in the dusty corridors of the Hellenic Epigraphical Museum in Athens, a young historian named Nikos Stavros uncovered a weathered scroll fragment. The ink was faint, but the name was clear, Callisthenes of Pergamon. The fragment contained part of a philosophical treatise lost to time, a musing on the internal driver of discipline. One line repeated like a refrain. Purpose is the wheel. Discipline is the spoke. Without the wheel, the spoke collapses. Nico translated the text and posted it online. It went viral in the academic community and eventually found its way to Elena. She printed it out and pinned it on her office wall. There it was. Proof that even millennia ago, someone understood what she had spent her life trying to prove. The why is the core. She added the quote to her next keynote address, titled simply, Full Circle. At the start of her presentation, she told a story, not of PET scans or dopamine, but of a young man under a cypress tree, asking questions that outlived him. She ended with a personal confession. I became a neuroscientist because I thought science had answers. But I stayed a neuroscientist because purpose has questions. The crowd stood. Many wept. Years passed. Elena became more than a researcher. She became a bridge. Between worlds. Between disciplines. Between then and now. She partnered with universities across continents, integrating ancient philosophical inquiry into medical training, into psychotherapy, even into prisons. She returned to writing, publishing her first book, The Purpose Circuit, Memory, Motivation, and Meaning. It danced between storytelling and science, ancient wisdom and neural diagrams. It was shortlisted for literary and science awards alike. And one quiet spring morning, she stood in front of the ruins of the Pergamon library, wind in her hair, scroll in hand. Theo stood beside her, sketchbook under his arm, eyes scanning the horizon. This where your guy died? He asked. Yes, Elena said, placing a small stone at the base of a crumbling column. He died defending knowledge. Not for himself, for those who'd come after. Theo looked down at the mosaic beneath their feet, still faintly visible. It was a circle carved into the floor. A wheel, a spoke, a flame. You think we're just finishing his sentence? He asked. No, Elena said, touching the stone. I think we're the proof that he never stopped speaking. The years that followed were filled with a quiet but profound change, a ripple effect that extended beyond Elena's work, beyond even her own life. The Full Circle Project began to spread across the world, not as a mere academic initiative, but as a cultural movement. It transcended borders, languages, and disciplines, uniting artists, scientists, activists, and ordinary people in the shared recognition of one core truth. Purpose drives us, and that purpose is not merely external, but embedded in the deepest recesses of our humanity. Elena, now a tenured professor, spent much of her time traveling. giving lectures, consulting for healthcare systems, and helping to design curricula that blended the science of motivation with the ancient philosophy of purpose. Every lecture she gave was filled with stories of patients who found new meaning, of students who reconnected with their passions, of families who healed through a return to their shared purpose. It was during one of these trips, in a small coastal village in Japan, that Elena had a quiet moment of realization. She sat on the porch of a small inn, the sea stretching infinitely in front of her, the same way it had once stretched before the philosophers of ancient Greece. Theo had accompanied her on this trip, sketching the landscape, as always. The village had a rhythm to it, a sense of calm purpose that seemed almost forgotten in the bustle of modern life. Elena thought back to the countless times she had been asked the question that still haunted her. Why do you do it? Her answer had always been the same: to remember. But now, as she looked out over the horizon, she realized the deeper truth. She wasn't just trying to remind others of their purpose. She was reminding herself. It was the small things, the moments when the world slowed down, that allowed her to feel the pulse of her own purpose again. The quiet acknowledgement that she, too, was part of this ongoing circle, that every choice she made, every patient she helped, every person who walked through the door of her lab, was a continuation of something larger than herself. She looked at Theo, who was sitting on the steps, gazing at his sketchbook. "You ever wonder," she asked, her voice soft, "if we're all just part of a much bigger story?" Theo smiled, his gaze lifting toward the ocean. "I think we're writing that story. Together." The years turned into decades, and Elena's work became a cornerstone of a new paradigm in psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. Her research was no longer controversial. It was foundational. Universities began integrating the concept of purpose into their curricula, and healthcare systems around the world adopted programs based on her principles. People no longer sought mere relief from symptoms. They sought to rediscover meaning, to reconnect with the purpose that resided deep within them. Elena's legacy wasn't just the science she had pioneered, but the lives she had touched. Patients whose lives had been transformed by a shift in perspective, students who had become advocates for purpose-driven therapy, and even Theo, who had gone on to become one of the most celebrated contemporary artists, using his own work to explore the intersection of neuroscience and human experience. In her later years, Elena returned to Athens, to the city that had sparked the question that had driven her life's work. She stood once again in the Agora, the place where philosophers had once gathered to discuss the nature of existence, purpose, and the soul. She had visited the ruins many times before, but now there was a quiet peace in her heart. She made her way to the cypress tree beneath which Callisthenes had once sat, the philosopher whose own search for purpose had planted the seed of wisdom that had nourished so many generations. Beneath the sprawling branches, she paused, remembering the words he had whispered as he died. "May the echo continue." Elena smiled, knowing that the echo had, indeed, continued. She was part of that echo. And in that moment, she realized that the pursuit of purpose wasn't a destination. It was the very act of living, of being in tune with the deepest parts of oneself, of understanding that the how becomes clearer when the why is deeply felt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena looked to the sky. The stars were coming out, one by one, like ancient constellations that had long guided the lost. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the evening air, and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. "Thank you," she said, "for the purpose, for the journey, for the full circle." And in the silence of the evening, she knew that the flame of purpose would continue to burn, within her and beyond her, echoing across time, space, and generations. Forever.